You're listening to The Secrets of Doctor Who, where we discuss everything about the hit BBC series Doctor Who. And today we're discussing the 8th Doctor Big Finish story, Neverland. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
And Father Cory Sticha. Hey, Father Cory.
How's it going?
Folks, be sure to get your very own Secrets of Doctor Who t-shirt or phone case or whatever with this awesome custom design. Well, actually, that's the Secrets of Star Trek. With an awesome custom design. I showed the video, my Secrets of Star Trek shirt. I thought I was wearing the Secrets of Doctor Who one today.
This is where Dom's going to show his AI wizardry and have it changed via AI. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I wish I was that good. But it has a great custom design that we had with the three of us as Time Lords. And you can find that wherever a fine podcast. No, you can find that at sqpn.com/merch. Great start today. But I do want to tell you about another show on the StarQuest Network you are certain to enjoy called The Secrets of Star Trek. And I am wearing the shirt for that. And you can find that wherever fine podcasts are found, or at sqpn.com/Star Trek. And so, Jimmy, let's get right into it, and why don't you give us a recap of what happens in this one?
When the 8th Doctor rescued Charlie Pollard, who should have died in the R-101 air crash in 1930, he created a paradox. This week, the price of the paradox comes due, and the Time Lords, led by President Romana, come calling. The Doctor wants to hide Charlie away while he deals with his people, but Charlie insists on coming. It turns out that because she should have died in the R-101 crash, Charlie is entangled with a paradox that is unraveling the web of time. And this has been causing distortions that have been following the Doctor and Charlie through their adventures. The Time Lords have traced these distortions to a rift into a universe made of anti-time, that strange stuff from All Good Things, the series finale of Star Trek The Next Generation. When they go to the anti-time universe, they find a planetoid made out of normal matter, and on the planetoid they find a group of never people, or people who never existed in ordinary time. The Doctor and Charlie notice that the planetoid that they're on isn't actually a natural body, though. When they explore its interior, they realize it's an ancient wreck of a TARDIS. But whose TARDIS was it? They seem to get the answer when they discover a hologram of the famed Time Lord leader Rassilon. The hologram says that he actually died here in anti-time, not on Gallifrey, and he wants to come back to Gallifrey in proper time. The Never people agree to let the Time Lords take Rassilon's casket back to Gallifrey on condition that one of their leaders remain with them until they negotiate a treaty and President Romana stays, while Vansell, the ambitious and semi-traitorous coordinator of the Celestial Intervention Agency, takes the casket back to Gallifrey. Only the time station that he's on gets stuck between our universe and anti-time. Meanwhile, the Never people take an accusatory tone towards Romana, who they say should recognize them, because they are actually Time Lords that have been deleted from history, resulting in them being banished to anti-time. And the banishments are continuing due to CIA coordinator Vansell. The Doctor also has stayed in the anti-time universe, and he and Romana figure out that the idea Rassilon died here is a lie, and the Never people have created a trap with the idea of Rassilon as bait. The casket that Vansell is taken back to Gallifrey is actually an anti-time bomb that will detonate as soon as they arrive. However, since Vansell's time station is stuck, the Never people let the Doctor have his TARDIS back, and they take it to the time station to unstick it. Secretly, Romana is going to enter the Matrix in the time station and reprogram it so that Gallifrey's security shields won't let it land. That reprogramming, though, doesn't turn out to be possible, but the Doctor materializes his TARDIS around the time station in order to contain the anti-time explosion. In the process, Charlie's paradoxical status is resolved and inverted. Now Charlie has saved the web of time, so she can't endanger it. However, the Doctor seems to have become infected with an evil influence from anti-time, an ancient Time Lord fairy tale monster called Zagreus. But, as with this story and its anti-time, must come to an end, all good things. The end.
Very good. Very good. Father Cory, your overall impression of this story?
I enjoyed this one. It was kind of interesting that, of course it's we've got this alternate universe that's causing problems in our current universe story, but it was very interesting, kind of fleshed out little more of the history of the Time Lords, introducing Romana as president. I believe this is the first time, at least in any Who material, she was referred to as president. Maybe some of the books did, or comics or something, but
there was a history that Russell T Davies wrote for the 2005 relaunch that referred to her that way, but that may have actually been released. That was released after this, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, because this is 2002. This came out. So I think this is the first time Romana appeared in Big Finish, at least as president. So that's cool. And of course, that's something that's going to go forward as we look at other material. We'll probably run into her again in that role. It was an enjoyable story. Wasn't that as confusing as some? And I think they simplified kind of the locations, and that helped a lot. So I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Jimmy, how about you?
Yeah, I liked it too. I thought it was. I didn't enjoy the fact it's almost 2.5 hours long. Mm-hmm. I think they could have gotten it shorter, because it's longer than a typical Doctor Who story, even a 4-parter. This is like a 6-parter, and although it's actually only structured in 2 parts, it filled 2 CDs. So I thought it was a little long and a little hard to follow towards the end with exactly what was happening with Charlie and so forth. But I enjoyed it overall. I did like having President Romana, and this is Romana 2. This is Romana's second incarnation, played by Lalla Ward, which we have not gotten to yet here on the podcast, but is coming up.
Except on Shada.
On Shada, and she had a scene in the 5 Doctors, and stuff like that. But we haven't gotten to any of her adventures yet.
Yeah.
But I'm glad they finally wrapped up Charlie's paradoxical status, so now she can travel with the Doctor without that hanging over them. They also linked in aspects of the previous adventures where things had been happening with Charlie because of her paradoxical status, and some of them were obvious to the audience, but others were not as obvious to the audience. Like, you may remember they had that Vortisaur as kind of a pet on the TARDIS for a while, and here it's explained that the reason he was attracted to Charlie is that creatures can feed off of her paradoxical status, and the Never people do that. For example, she gives them, her paradox gives them power, and in the same way, the Vortisaur was like getting energy from her because of her paradox, and so it overall it's nicely done. I also like how Romana, even though she's cast in a role where she could be an antagonist, she's really sympathetic. To the Doctor. The Doctor initially wants to hide Charlie away by sending her on a vacation for a year while he deals with his people, because he's afraid they're going to demand that Charlie be killed in order to resolve the paradox. And Charlie realizes what he's up to and won't have it. She's like, I should have died on the R101, and that was my fault. I was the one who chose to travel that day. So everything I've had since then is a gift, but I can't destroy the web of time. And if I have to die in order to save everything, then so be it. And she's willing to face the Time Lords. She's even willing late in the story to let the Doctor shoot her in order to resolve the paradox, which he says he can't do, the Doctor can never physically attack a companion except that once. But I like Charlie's character development in this, and I like that Romana, right from as soon as the Doctor and Romana come face to face, it's like Romana is stern but reasonable. It's like, yes, Doctor, I understand you don't want your friend to die, and I'm willing to try to help make that happen for her not to die.
Right. Yeah, I mean, she still kind of bears some holdover feelings about their time together, traveling together. Things that every relationship has, the bumps, and so that shows up a little bit, which is kind of fun. But yeah.
Speaking of the Doctor not letting his companion die, Clara hasn't learned that lesson yet.
I want to go back to that because there's some interesting parallels. No, I do want to come back to that because there are some interesting parallels. But I just want to give my overall impression too, and which is that I enjoyed it. It was too long. I agree with that. But I really enjoyed the diving into so much about the Time Lords. But like, this was a deep dive in, when I place this in its time, the literal time, 2002, all that stuff from New Who had not been developed yet, all the lore. So this is really building off of the lore we had from the classic Who, and we really get a lot more of the Time Lord society, which in fact classic Who has done a lot more with than New Who, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we get glances at it, but classic Who, we really felt like we had an insight into who these people were. We saw the normal operation of things at times. And so it was kind of nice to see some building on that. And, interesting to see the Romana has moved on to become president, or I think in this one they call her Imperatrix.
That's in a Nightmare Future Vision in the Matrix. She's become not just president, but Imperatrix.
Oh, okay. I was trying to. I got a few things mixed up as I was listening to it with that. So okay, so that's interesting. But in general, I like it. I like how Charlie develops, and the cliffhanger at the end is very interesting. We'll talk about that as we go along too. I was a little confused by the whole thing with Zagreus.
Mm-hmm.
What is Zagreus, and what would have to do with Rassilon and these Never people?
They're building up to Zagreus. This is a story they pay off next year in 2003. They've mentioned Zagreus previously in the Eighth Doctor's Adventures with this Time Lord nursery rhyme, the first verse of which is, Zagreus sits inside your head, Zagreus watches you. I don't remember it all, but it's like, Zagreus sits inside your head, Zagreus watches
lives among
you,
the dead,
lives among the
Zagreus
dead, watches you in your bed and eats you while you're sleeping.
Yeah.
Good night.
Yeah. And so Zagreus is going to end up being a monster from anti-time. But the Doctor doesn't currently believe in him. But here, since this ends with the cliffhanger of the Eighth Doctor becoming possessed by Zagreus, they really hit the Zagreus button a bunch of times in this.
Right.
And the Doctor is regularly very dismissive of Zagreus is just a fairy tale. It's nothing. It doesn't exist, until at the end he's possessed by it.
Yeah.
And this is going to build up to a multi-Doctor story in 2003 where you get the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th Doctors together in a story called Zagreus.
Right. It's the 50th Big Finish story, so they made it a big deal.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the next one we're going to do when we come back around to the Eighth Doctor again. So I want to kind of start with talking about the origin of the Never People, which is this Time Lord, well, actually Celestial Intervention Agency, black site execution chamber, almost like a star chamber, where they not just kill people, but remove them from time so that no one knows they've killed this person, which is kind of horrific and probably something that's some real intelligence agencies would love to be able to do because they'll never get caught.
It has precedence in literature. I'm forgetting who it was, but there was an early 20th century horror author. I forget if it was Algernon Blackwood or whoever it was, but it was, in the ancient world, they had damnatio memorare, the condemnation in memory, where if somebody had done something really bad, they would try to destroy every record that this person ever existed. Mm-hmm. And in Egypt, they would do that too. So like Hatshepsut, the pharaoh who was a woman, one of the pharaohs who was a woman, when she died, her successor struck her name off the monuments. And this was a regular thing that would happen. We can tell, when this has happened, archaeologists can, because they can see the carved name is deeper than it should be. So like one pharaoh originally carved their name there, and then another pharaoh who didn't like them and wanted to claim credit for this monument came along and either struck their name off or carved his own name over it, and now it's deeper in the stone. And so you would eliminate people you didn't like Akhenaten, that crazy heretic guy. You would obliterate references to him on monuments. Well, one of the early 20th century horror authors, maybe it was Algernon Blackwood, wrote a story about the gods getting so angry at a guy that they not only decreed that he must never be remembered, they decreed that he must never have existed. And this is kind of picking up that idea and applying it in a Time Lord context.
And by the way, the thought that the idea of striking someone's history, off the monument stuff, that's something that was even happening in the 20th century. There's that famous picture of the Stalins at the shipyards with some guy, and the guy did something to tick Stalin off, so they airbrushed him out after he was killed.
Yep.
Right. Early versions of photoshopping without computers.
Yep. Down the memory hole.
Exactly. And you say, well, people would remember. You can't remove people's memories, but on a given enough time, like some of these pharaohs, we have, we don't have records of them, so they've ceased to exist because everyone who lived to remember them is long gone. So that's kind of the same thing, yeah.
And if you did bring up the memory of this pharaoh, you would disappear too,
right?
Most likely.
Right. So in this case, we have the what they call it, the oubliette of history. Oubliette being a French word meaning to forget, but it refers to dungeons.
It's an underground chamber where you can imprison someone.
Right. It would be like a put him in the hole, which is the colloquial way we talk about it. And the way we learn about this is a really cool scene. I don't say fun. Cool scene where Romana is confronted. She's been taken hostage and is being confronted by these Never people who, don't you remember us? Don't you remember when you were a little girl and you would go to the stream? She's like, that event. I remember that event. I was alone. No, we were there with you. We were your friends. And it turns out these two people were taken down the memory hole. They were taken to the oubliette of history and were moved from her memory and her history, not even just her memory, but just from her timeline. They didn't exist. And I wonder, if I want to take this too far, you'd have to be careful not to remove people who've done things, the sort of It's a Wonderful Life problem where you cause more problems by taking a person out of history, but
the Time Lords apparently have the skills to do that, at least unless it doesn't involve a fixed point.
Well,
they also talk about how is it in this? It's something I saw recently where they talked about this person doesn't have any long-lasting consequences, so it's okay to remove them.
Right.
Also, they're being a little irrational, blaming Romana for not remembering her friends since they've been deleted. Of course, she's not going to remember them, but they're irrational. So that's the explanation for that.
Yeah. Well, they talk about with the scene where Charlie is there, or the doctor's being encouraged to kill Charlie. They talk about she has no family, no children of any consequence, et cetera, et cetera. So it won't matter if she is killed and then ends up being put in the wreck of the R101 to look like she died in that instead. So so she doesn't have that history. Now, of course, they've got the super mega Uber computer called the Matrix that they could use to say, okay, if this person continues, what could happen? Oh, they're not going to be of consequence. Off them.
Right. And the leader of the Never people was, what the name was Centris? Was that the name?
Centris, yeah.
Centris. And so this person assumes the
form of Charlie
and has a version of her voice. I'll just say her.
Yep.
And was a leader of the CIA, the Celestial Intervention, and felt so much guilt over the people being sent through the oubliette of history that they themselves sentenced themselves to it and removed themselves from history, which is an interesting, but yet blames
Yeah.
Time Lords for it, I guess.
Their Centris is still being irrational.
Mhm.
One of the things that they talk about that I like in this concept is when you start disappearing people from history, including from everybody's memories, you forget how many people you've done that to.
Yeah.
And it can become more common than you realize it is.
Right. Although there's apparently a time-protected vault where the records of this are kept.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Which is also interesting.
So you'd have to make sure to put the records in before you did it.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. And then you could go in there and see the complete list of all the horrible things your people have done.
That they chose to record. The real world CIA has been notorious for not recording and records losing and records destroying things.
Yep.
Right. I mean, this is sort of based on those stories. That's the idea of the CIA. They're the dirty tricks organization of the Time Lords. This is long established in classic Who.
It's interesting too because of course we've seen where the Time Lords used to do basically death penalty where they would dissolve you, your bodies would be just basically disintegrated, but you wouldn't be wiped out of history. So in theory, you must have to be worse if this was done legitimately for them to just say, no, we're going to take you completely out of time. You will not have ever existed.
Right. I would think like for people who taking them out of time would cause too much of a disruption, those would be the ones they would just execute. Like you couldn't just do this to the Doctor because that would be too much of a disruption.
He's a complex space-time event.
It's come up. The CIA hasn't come up in the New Who much, if at all.
Instead, they've come up with the Division,
right?
Which is sort of the new equivalent of the CIA.
They're kind of almost like Section 31, the Star Trek Section 31, where they're this smaller group of even worse people, or something along those lines. The other thing, the big character in this, it sort of shows up is Rassilon.
Mm-hmm.
In classic Who, Rassilon was, in at this time period, Rassilon was this mythic figure. In New Who, we remember Rassilon has shown up, and Rassilon becomes Time Lord President again. We just talked about him in when we discussed Hellbent.
Well,
before that, he was Timothy Dalton.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, well, and he's been resurrected for New Who.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Even when we talked about Hellbent, he calls himself, the one who has been resurrected.
Right. And when we talked about the Five Doctor story, that also was, we see a similar holographic image of Rassilon, which may be what inspired this this appearance. But all of it, Rassilon in this, is a fake out. This isn't. None of this is really Rassilon or not.
Well, no. So the Rassilon that they meet on the planetoid in Antitime, that's a fake.
Mm-hmm.
But the real Rassilon does show up, even though he's dead. He shows up in some kind of time stop apparition, both to the Eighth Doctor and to Romana.
Yep.
And basically says, even though I'm dead, I've been watching you, and I'm not happy about everything, but on balance, I'm really pleased with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't seem like they remember it though. At least the Doctor, because he's like, what was I doing? I don't remember. He doesn't remember that it had happened, and just kind of goes on with what he was doing. But he does show up.
I find it very interesting that Van Cell, the current coordinator of the CIA, he has this impassioned speech about how wonderful Rassilon is and how much better Time Lord Society would be and how much better off Gallifrey would be if only Rassilon were returned. And he kind of builds him up so much, and I'm kind of laughing because the Rassilon that we've just seen in the 12th Doctor's time is not any of that.
He was very ineffectual.
Yeah.
Yep.
But there was still this idea at this time in 2002, left over from the 7th Doctor's time, when he really came up, that Rassilon was this great figure that if only we, this George Washington of Time Lord Society, if only we could get him back, we would be so much better off.
Very much building up the mythos of Rassilon himself,
10
foot tall and bulletproof and things like that,
Goes
And
back to that old adage. Go ahead.
And they continued that in the Timothy Dalton era. It was just the most recent Rassilon regeneration that was very ineffectual.
Yep.
Don't meet your heroes, I think is the old saying. The other thing, and this is, I want to get back to what you had said earlier, Father Cory, was Charlie as, reminding us of Clara, but she kind of reminds me also of Clara post Face the Raven, so the undead Clara who's the problem for time, which is, I wonder how much Charlie inspired that story, but also a little bit the Impossible Girl as well, who's, throughout the 10th, the 11th Doctor's timeline has to fix it and that sort of thing. It's kind of interesting to see this echo of Charlie going into the future to Clara. What do you think of that? Is that intentional that they brought that back?
Possible. I mean, a lot of the people who worked on the Big Finish stories went on to work on New Who, so it's possible that Stephen Moffat pulled from that. I do think that Clara's version, as much as I said when we talked about that episode, I didn't like, it gets around the whole paradox thing of pulling her out right before she dies. She goes and does whatever travel she does, and off screen, eventually she goes back and actually finishes up the death. So you don't actually have the paradox there, whereas you do with Charlie. They kind of clean that aspect of the story up.
Right, because the solution that they eventually come up with Charlie is she's somehow, like Palpatine, somehow she survived the crash of the R101 and walked out unscathed from the flames.
And that was because of the Doctor. Mm-hmm. The Doctor tampered with a fixed point in time and created the paradox.
Yep.
Right, and in order to fix, what was this? I wrote it down, how it works. History's web was saved by the fact of her existence, and therefore the fact of her existence cannot have imperiled it.
Right.
Yeah, that's what they say. I don't know that makes sense.
Yeah, and they said something like the history of the web of time starting to unravel is actually part of the history of the web of time.
Right. So it made it a fixed point that you couldn't undo, and therefore the paradox has to survive or something.
And we should say at this time the idea of fixed point hasn't been developed yet. That is a New Who.
Yeah. Right.
Unless Big Finish at some other point comes up with it. I don't know. I haven't listened to a lot of Big Finish, but other than what we've done for the show. So
yeah.
No, I'm applying the term retroactively.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. I mean, it's effectively a fixed point in time. They're just not calling it that. And that the effectively calling it that has happened. Like effectively not calling it that. Effectively having a fixed point that you can't change. Right. That's come up in Classic Who before, but they just never call it that. Yep.
Yeah, I don't think that there's a lot of, I mean, I can't rule out that Stephen Moffat was inspired by some of this, but I don't think there's a direct inspiration, because Clara being the Impossible Girl and Clara dying because of a paradox is two different things narratively. Her death is not driven by the fact she's the Impossible Girl. In fact, she had like 3 different deaths that they had wrote, and they canceled the first 2, and it's just chance that the last one involves a paradox where you've got to face the Raven. And her being the Impossible Girl is different than Charlie, because the whole point of introducing her as the Impossible Girl is the Doctor does not know what explains her. He keeps meeting the same person in different time periods, and he doesn't know why. Whereas the Doctor is the cause of Charlie's paradox. He's the reason she's impossible. It's because he saved her life. He knows from the very first moment of their second adventure that she shouldn't be here, and he knows he's responsible. So there's no mystery for the Doctor to solve, whereas the whole point of Clara in the beginning is the Doctor does not know what explains her. I think I think that Stephen Moffat got the idea of what if the Doctor had this companion he couldn't figure out, and that's the that he kept meeting in different times. That was the neat idea that Stephen Moffat wanted to explore. He wasn't trying to recreate Charlie. Also, if there is a prior inspiration for the Impossible Girl, I would say it's River Song. because you have the same thing where the Doctor meets this person who is his companion and doesn't know, and he keeps meeting her in different times, and he has to figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I guess it's only in the broadest sense that there's a similarity where they are both companions who are time paradoxes of some sort.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then, we mentioned at the end, the Doctor gets possessed by Zagreus and leaves us with a cliffhanger for the next one. So that was, I guess we talked about that. Any other bits of this that you wanted to bring up?
I like the idea of the time torpedo, where it basically freezes them in time, and so they have hundreds of years to basically break the lock on the TARDIS.
Yes,
because they say that the TARDIS of course the Doctor tries to escape and does escape due to a time rift, and then Charlie hits the quick return button and sends him right back in the middle of it. Which again, that was a great scene. I like that. Mm-hmm. Charlie's like, "No, I'm going to face the consequences." Hits the button, and by the time the Doctor can't stop it. But then the idea that basically the TARDIS gets frozen in time with everybody inside of it, and so the Time Lord's got all the time in the world, literally, to pick the lock, more or less. Because of course they always say, the locks on the TARDIS, it take hundreds of years and all this work to do it. Well, they've got that time. They can go take lunch breaks. They can send other people to do it. They got all the time in the world.
Right. One other thing I wanted to mention, I just watched the second season of the Marvel series Loki, the Disney Plus series, and something that comes out of that, and I'll try to avoid spoilers on this, but there might be a minor spoiler, but there's a description of Rassilon as denying free will to the people of universe by tying them to one single reality. The Never people, I think, bring that up. Tie him to one single reality. And it sounds a lot like the character. I won't say he's kind of the antagonist of the Loki series. He's called He Who Remains, and he's behind this effort of the Time Variant Authority to create one sacred timeline. That's the purpose of the Time Variant Authority is to trim off all branching timelines and to have one sacred timeline. And it's almost like that. There's I just felt like it was a very similar idea of, removing people's free will. That's actually a huge comment that comes up in Loki is, do people have free will if you tie off their ability to vary from the one timeline? And I thought that was interesting that they would bring it up here because, if you will not let people vary from the way you see time panning out to the end of time, where's your free will?
Right. Well, it just means you're a control freak. It doesn't mean you've gone into someone's head and taken away their free will.
Right. They made a choice, and then you trim that choice off the timeline. That's a right. So that they can only have chosen. It's a sort of because it's a multiverse view of existence.
Well, and the whole idea of the web of time is the fact that every time someone makes a choice, another branch, spreads off.
Right.
Where, and so you've got this web of interacting decisions and choices and free will that creates the web.
Mm.
Although they bizarrely say that Rassilon created the web of time in this, which I was like, I don't think you should be believing your own publicity on that.
Yeah.
Right. Anything else you want to say? As Father Cory, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Nope, that was it.
Jimmy, do you have any more to add?
Yeah, so just a couple brief things. One of them is they have this time station, which is, and it's like, okay, so that's clearly a substitute for space station.
Mm-hmm.
But what exactly is a time station? I guess it's, like a space station is a station that hangs in outer space, and so I guess a time station would be a station that hangs in the vortex, maybe. Something like that. So I was just puzzling about that, and I thought it was interesting. Okay, they're a time exploring culture, whereas a space exploring culture. So a time station, whatever it might be, is kind of a neat idea. But the other thing was right at the beginning when we have this opening sequence of people in the Matrix trying to remember the universe as it should be. in order to preserve it because the web of time is becoming unraveled. And so you have a bunch of Time Lord figures who I guess are in the Matrix, rattling off events in history, in Earth history and alien history and Time Lord history, and they name the year and whether it's the Rassilon era or the human era or whatever it is, and announcing different events. And in one of the very first ones, they mentioned Tercerus. And Tercerus is the planet from Doctor Who and the Curse of Fatal Death with Rowan Atkinson, where the Master has to crawl through the sewers for centuries.
Yeah,
and
multiple times.
And I always love it when we get a reference to Tercerus because that's clearly a non-canon story, but they're treating it as canon. They do the same thing in one of the Missy sets, or where Missy meets River Song, and they're talking about, do we want to escape through these tunnels? And Missy says, I had quite enough of that on Tercerus.
So when was that special? That had to, I guess it was before 2003 then. Wow. I thought it was after. Okay. Well, anything else, Jimmy?
Nope.
Very good. So that will do it for this time. And before we go, we'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons and make it possible.
It was 1999, so it was just 3 years before this.
Thank you. So thank you to our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Doctor Who, including Sandra M., Kent H., Henry H., Haley H., and Tess W. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Doctor Who and all the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. We'd also like to thank Zyman Yannick, who edited this episode. So that's it from us. We'd love to know what you think of this 8th Doctor story, Neverland. You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com or the Secrets of Doctor Who Facebook page, or send an email to drwho@sqpn.com, or visit the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. You can now watch the Secrets of Doctor Who on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia, and of course, leave a comment there as well. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the 4th Doctor story, The Robots of Death. Until then, Father Cory Sticha, thank you for joining me and sharing the Secrets of Doctor Who. Jimmy Akin, thank you as well.
Thanks, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Doctor Who on StarQuest, and remember, love never dies, however brief our lives might be.